Pamādaṃ appamādena, yadā nudati paṇḍito, paññāpāsādamāruyha, asoko, sokiniṃ pajaṃ, Pabbataṭṭhova bhūmaṭṭhe, dhīro, bāle, avekkhati. Okay, now we are going to kind of break with our new Pali policy. And that's because this verse actually has a little bit of an ambiguity, at least to me. And so I want to go through this and kind of explain how it can be understood. So we'll just jump right in this first line. Now, there are these two gattas. We've dealt with Pamādaṃ and appamādena before. I didn't write them down. Pamādaṃ, carelessness, and here as an object, and appamādena, vigilance, and this is in the instrumental case. So obviously neither one of these are our subject. So we'll go on here. Now our next word, yadā. This is an adverb and it means when. Very often in Pali prose especially, when we have a yadā, that would be followed by a tada. I'll put that here. Let's see. If I could type. And if I get the right keyboard, it'd be followed by that. Now, here we can scan this. We don't have a tada. And what that means is we're going to have to figure out where that tada is. Or another way to say it is, to say the same thing is, we have to figure out where or how, where is the end of yadā? How far does this reach? Now, I would say, I think when you look at translations, I think most of them just have it go to here. And then they would insert the logical tada would be down here. And I'll explain that in a minute, more about how I think that's not the best way to understand it. But let's finish out this line. So we have when, and then we have nudati paṇḍito. Now you'll notice I've color-coded paṇḍito and nudati. Nudati is our verb, present active indicative, third person singular present active indicative. And paṇḍito is our masculine nominative singular. So this is our subject, a wise person. This has come up in this vagga as well, this chapter. So when a wise person, nudati, and this verb means to expel, drive away, or reject. And if we're looking for an object, we'll find it right here in Pamādaṃ. So this first line, if we take it by itself, when a wise person rejects carelessness by means of carefulness or vigilance, then we could go on. Then, understood, the rest of this is going to happen. Now, before we go on, we have to address the way verbs work in Pali, or more specifically, how a sequence of actions are presented verbally, like what verbal forms are used. So you'll notice we have some other green text here. This one down here, you can tell this is also a third person singular present active indicative verb. Now this one doesn't look like the others, and that's because it's in a different form. This is our absolutive, and an absolutive doesn't actually have, it's indeclinable. So it has a tense. It happens before the main verb. And to explain that, I should first say that in Pali, if we have a sequence of actions, only the final verb, I guess it'd be this way if you're reading in English, only the final verb would be something like this. Only the final verb would be like, would have tense and, would have a person. In other words, would be third person singular. It could be second person plural. It could be first person singular. But the verbs leading up to that would all be in the absolutive. And I hope I haven't muddled that too much. So let me give you an example. Let's talk about an English example first. I parked my car, I went into the store, and I bought some bread. Now, if we were to say that in Pali, in English, but if we were to express it the way Pali does, having parked my car, having gone into the store, I bought bread. So the point about this is that this verb here, or this verbal idea, this is happening before the main verb. And I think I haven't looked at all the translations, but it seems like most translators are taking this to be the first verb in a series and this verb to be the second. And what that means is we would have, after this first line, then having done this, a person does this. A person having done this, then a person does this. So we'll keep that in mind, and I want to come back to that in a little bit, but I just want to plant the seed here. Here's a question. Now, say you agree with me that there's some ambiguity here. What then is the role of a translator? And again, we, of course, aren't making a formal translation. We're using English to understand the Pali. I'm not fluent in Pali, and I don't know how many people on the planet are at this point. So that I can't certainly use Pali to talk about the Pali. So I have to use English. We could use other languages. But the question is, if we were preparing a formal translation, if the original text has an ambiguity, is it the job of a translator to clarify the ambiguity? Or is it the job of a translator to the best of the translator's ability, preserve the ambiguity? In other words, are we trying to recreate somewhat of the experience of the original, hearing the original, reading the original? Like I said, I want to circle back to that, but I think it's kind of an interesting question, for sure. So let's look at this little bit here. Paññāpāsādamāruyha. So that breaks apart into these three words here, paññā, paṣādaṃ, and āruhya. Really, these have just kind of been run together due to speech. These words, these two here, I put them in brackets because they do form a tapurisa compound. And that means we have to kind of figure out how the two words relate to one another. So we have this āruyha, this absolutive form from āruhati, to climb up, to ascend. Having ascended. And then we have pāsādaṃ. Now, this, because it's been run up against this this would normally be but it's lost that paṣādaṃ āruyha. Just easier to say for Pali speakers. So this is the object right here, this compound. And specifically the ending part of the compound, paṣādaṃ. Now that means a lofty platform, a palace, or a terrace. Having ascended or gone up onto this lofty platform. And then we have the word paññā, wisdom. Remember, that's prajna in Sanskrit, prajna paramita sutra, the perfection of wisdom sutra. So we kind of have to figure out what case is paññā. We don't get the case in these types of compounds. Now, even if I write it out like paññāya, that still isn't a huge amount of help, because this could be instrumental, dative, it could even be locative. Did I say instrumental? So, but the one that I think it is genitive. Having gone up onto the lofty platform of wisdom. Now, that's the first part of the sequence of actions. Now, the other thing to keep in mind here is I did put in blue all of these nominative, masculine nominative singulars. And not only are they all masculine nominative singular, they all are referring to the same person. This one isn't exactly, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So this wise person having when a wise person rejects carelessness by means of carefulness, then having gone up onto the lofty platform of wisdom. And now we have a description of this paṇḍito again, asoko, sorrowless. So this is our which when it's used in Greek, people usually say alpha privative. It's the same thing like asymmetric or something. So asoko, sorrowless. And I want to come down here then. This has also come up, I think, in verse 23. Dhīro, another word for wise. So maybe we'll just say a sage here. The sorrowless sage, and we might even put this before this verbal idea, having the sorrowless sage having ascended or gone up onto the lofty platform of wisdom, views sokiniṃ pajaṃ. Now, sokiniṃ is it probably is pretty obvious that it's related to soko. And it's a feminine adjective. This is feminine accusative singular, and it means sorrowful. And why is it feminine accusative singular? Because the word it's modifying, pajaṃ, is also feminine accusative singular. And this word's interesting because it really is, if you use the word progeny, it's basically the exact parallel. This pa means pro, and this jung is related to this word gen, gen, like Genesis, generation. And here, if we use the word generation, we're meaning like the young generation or an old generation, a group of people. So the sorrowless sage sees, I put it down here, looks at, considers, sees the sorrowless generation, sees, now we have to repeat this because there's another object here, sees the foolish, bāle. This is our masculine accusative plural ending from the class of nouns. And then we get a little bit of a simile here. Sees these sorrowful, or sees the foolish people just as, so this is a short form of, did I put it down here somewhere? I thought I did. Yeah, Eva. It's really just the short form of Eva. It's either the short form or the E has been, the O, a long O takes precedence, so it can kind of stamp out of existence and a short I. Just like, and this word's probably kind of familiar, Pabbataṭṭhova, a mountain. And this last part here, it's really to, that means standing on, like t. From the root of that is sta, like to stand, stare in Latin, histemi in Greek. So just like a person, because this is masculine nominative singular, just like a person standing, who is standing on a mountain. This is another tapurisa, so standing on a mountain. And we have to take this verb again, a third time, sees, and then we have really the same word here, but now it's in the masculine accusative plural, sees people standing on the ground. Bhūma. Now this is, I don't know if it's more rare or if it's more poetic. Very often you're going to see the word bhumi. In Thai they use that word. If you've ever flown to Bangkok, you've probably gone to Suvarnabhumi Airport, the Golden Land Airport. Okay, now that is how you can take this this verse. I am going to write it out now, and I'm going to take it slightly differently. And it just hinges on yadā, and I'm extending the yadā, and you can tell me what you think of this, dear listener. I'm extending the yadā all the way to the end of this gatha here. So we could say, when a wise person, now I'm going to keep it like having ascended the lofty platform of wisdom. We could just say, when a wise person ascends the lofty platform of wisdom and rejects carelessness by means of carefulness, or we could go back and say vigilance. There was something I wanted to point out here, and rejects carelessness. Oh, you could just say by vigilance, but we're just spelling it out here. By means of vigilance. And then the sorrowless sage sees the sorrowful generation, sees foolish people just like a person standing on a mountain sees those on the ground. We could say something on the ground below to just emphasize that. But now, I will not claim that the ambiguity here is causing a huge difference in readings. Overall, the idea is vigilance, and by means of vigilance, seeing people, seeing foolish people. And that might seem a little almost cruel, but I'm part of that foolish people, unfortunately, not liberated people. Of course, this is always done with compassion and not disdain or anything. Sees foolish people just like someone standing on a mountain. So even this idea of looking down, it doesn't have that idea of, be gone, people beneath me. Just as, they haven't, or we haven't yet made that ascent. And maybe we're not even trying to ascend up onto this lofty platform of wisdom. I guess the question, this comes down to whether you think that you first use vigilance and then you go up, then you achieve this wisdom, which then allows us to see people a certain way. Or is it that we first use wisdom and then that allows us to use or to make use of vigilance? And I certainly can see where people would think that really that vigilance is going to give rise to wisdom. But you can also imagine that wisdom itself is going to give rise to even more vigilance, to a better understanding of what it is to be careful, how we should be careful, how we should be more ethical and virtuous and compassionate as we go through life. So anyway, I will leave that here. I don't know if anyone's made it this far. If you have, I wish there was some sort of award I could give you. But I do welcome your comments, dear listener, and if you think I've gone astray in any of my presentation here. And actually, I just want to clarify one thing about the whole issue of ambiguity. Whether or not you agree that the text we just looked at, the verse, was ambiguous, there certainly are texts that are ambiguous. They doesn't have to be in an ancient language. It could be in our own native language where there are cases of ambiguity. And I think the question that I meant to put in the main part of the video is, to what extent do we welcome ambiguity? Is it a sign of our prosaic culture that we cannot sort of handle ambiguity? Another way to say that is, perhaps the ambiguity is intentional, and that, particularly in poetry, there is a range of ways to take the text. So I guess that's what I'm saying. Now, obviously, there are ambiguities that can arise from, say, a garbled text, where something has, maybe by a scribe or something's been just printed wrong, and we have to look at it and think, this, it's just maybe not grammatical, and it seems very likely that it's not intentional. That, again, there are scribal errors, they're just misprints, things like that happen all the time. But when we're dealing with something that isn't of that category, how do we approach ambiguity? And so I think that's what I was trying to get at, and I'm still groping to express myself. I'm groping around in the dark trying to express myself by, do we welcome the ambiguity and try to share it, or do we try to explain it away? And on that, I will finally leave you in peace.